Far too often I see people working underneath their car without using jack stands. This really makes me cringe. If you guys are doing that, you're asking for a trip to the emergency room. In this video, I want to show you how to lift your car the right way, how to place your jack stand safely underneath it, and avoid the deadly mistakes that I've seen even experienced technicians make. Let's get right into it. Today we're talking jacks and jack stands and how to safely lift these things. The first thing you need to start with is some quality tools. I recommend you get yourself a pair of jack stands with the proper rating for your vehicle. In a minute here I'm going to show you where you can find your gross vehicle weight rating. You want to make sure that you have the capacity to hold at least a corner of the car with each jack stand. These are rated at 6,000 pounds each, which is going to be plenty for this car. And I also have a 3-ton floor jack here. You want to make sure that you have the same capacity to match your jack stands as well, and certainly enough capacity in order to lift the vehicle that you're working on. When you're selecting your tools outside of the weight rating, I like to choose tools that feel and look stable. So some of these jack stands that you can buy, they're made of flimsy stamped metal. Not a big fan of those things. Find something that's solid. It should be fairly heavy. I also like to use a jack stand that has 4 feet on it, not the tripod style. I like something with a more firm base on it. You don't want to be risking yourself underneath something that has a potential to tip over or something like that. So try to get something with a solid base, 4 corners, and definitely sturdy materials. So I'm over here on the driver's side of the vehicle. This is where you're generally going to find the vehicle's information, where it's going to display the gross vehicle weight rating. They'll show you the front and the rear. It might be somewhere here in the B pillar. Sometimes they put it on the outside of the driver's door, but it should be in this general area where you can find this information. Right here you can see this manufacturer's decal, and on here it's going to show you the gross vehicle weight rating. This is almost 5,000 pounds. Front and rear are going to be about half of that, but just make sure your jack stands are capable of holding that amount of weight for each corner that you're going to use. I specifically chose this vehicle to demonstrate on for you because I knew it was all covered up, and I wanted to give you an example of what you might find out in the real world. Get a car like this underneath. It's got all these plastic covers. It's really hard to find any particular spot to jack on without a lot of confidence. Even this one, I had to look at it closely to make sure that it had a proper jacking point in the front of the car. So I wanted to demonstrate to you while I've got this car up in the air where the jacking points are on here, where are some suitable alternatives if you can't find those or if they're not accessible for you for some reason, and where the actual factory lift points are where they want you to lift this car. Let's go ahead and walk around the vehicle and I'll show you some of these things. Right here there's a little plastic block that's attached to the subframe on the car. The subframe is a big box-like perimeter of steel and metal that's very sturdy, supports the engine. And on here in the center, they put this little plastic block for you to jack directly in the middle of the car. This would be a great point to lift the car with your jack, and then place your jack stands at the other lift points once you've got it up in the air. Another point that I think is suitable for jacking on is right at the end of this control arm where it meets the subframe. So this control arm runs all the way here to the wheel. You don't want to jack up on the tie rod end. This is not a good spot to lift on, but this here is. And this point in particular, because there's a bolt that goes through here, and that's the pivot for this control arm to move up and down. But if you get it right here at the pivot point, it's not going to deflect a lot once you start to jack the vehicle. So if you try to jack over here, you're going to have a lot of movement on the jack. The suspension could be bouncy. This is a more suitable point. It's more stable here, so I would have no problem lifting here either, but you do have to be careful with your jack. We've got all these plastic covers, and you could, if you put it in the wrong spot, crack these covers trying to get access to here. That's why they give you this jacking point on the subframe. This Mercedes has lift pads on here that are designed to be used with these automotive above ground lifts or underground lifts. This is where they want you to put your arms in order to support the vehicle. But you can also use these to put your jack stands, and that's what I'm going to recommend to you. There's like a block under here that you can see that's designed specifically to hold the weight of the vehicle. If you're trying to lift the entire back end of the car to put jack stands under the rear of it, the rear differential is always a good place. If you have a rear-wheel drive car, you're going to have something that looks like this. They call it the pumpkin. This is made of sturdy metal, and it's usually affixed to the subframe or the frame in the back. So this is a good place to put your jacking pad and lift the car. There's no problem here. This is not moving at all, other than maybe a little flex in the bushings that mount it to the subframe. So if you're going to lift into the center point in the back of the car, I would use the rear differential. Now, if you're in a front-wheel drive car and you don't have a differential, there's usually something like this in the back, a piece of the subframe that protrudes down that's in the center of the car, and that might be a good place for you to jack as well if you're trying to get the entire back of the car off the ground in one shot. You can see here these rear control arms. That's this big piece over here. They're covered in plastic. But if you were to put your jack right here on the pivot point, like we did in the front, you could probably safely get this car up in the air in a pinch if you needed to get access here and you couldn't reach your jack all the way to the middle. This is not going to get the whole back of the car up at once. It's going to cause the car to pivot off the left rear wheel. So if you're going to use these 2 points, there's another one over here. Just make sure you understand that. Otherwise, try to get in the middle of the rear end. On this car, just like the front end, there's all kinds of plastic panels back here. If you try to put your jack under here, it's going to punch right through this and into the trunk. So make sure you're finding the correct location. Solid, sturdy metal, not anything plastic or covered in plastic. Stay away from those items. I've removed the lower cover from the bottom of this engine so that you can come in close and take a look at the subframe and see how this is laid out. You can see how sturdy this metal is on here and why they've put this little lift pad on there and why it makes it an acceptable spot to lift the vehicle up. When you're lifting your vehicle up, it's always best to consult your owner's manual. All that information will be laid out for you, where the acceptable jacking points are, how to use your jack, all those types of things. But I did want to give you some other examples. I've moved away from that Mercedes. I want to show you a few other cars, what they look like underneath, because yours might be more like that and less like the Mercedes. I'm underneath some sort of a Chevy Impala, I think, and it's got a full frame on it. And right here, anything that is solid metal frame is usually a good spot to jack on. If you want to go right up the middle, right here, this whole area here would be a great spot to put your jack under, lift the vehicle up, and place your jack stands. You can also put your jack underneath these control arms. You're not going to hurt them by lifting the car here, but we're going to have the same problem I mentioned earlier on the Mercedes, is that once you put it under here, you're fighting against the springs. The car can move a little bit, and not always the most stable spot to jack your vehicle. As I move back further on this Chevy product, you can see the frame starting to come together down here. This is a great spot to lift. It's also a great spot to put your jack stands. I would stay away from the middle of the vehicle. We're kind of dead in the middle of the vehicle in this area right here. We don't want to put jack stands anywhere towards the middle. You want to try to do a corner at a time. Move your jack stands out as far as you can so that you get a wider platform and a sturdier base. At the rear of the vehicle, I've got another giant piece of frame here. You can see we've got our lift set up on it already. And this is a great spot to put your jack or your jack stands. Everything is very solid in here. Right back here is the rear differential. Kind of like that Mercedes, this is also a good spot to jack your vehicle up, but you need to know there is something different about this vehicle. This whole rear end is a solid rear axle, what they call a solid rear axle, and it's connected through the spring, so there's going to be a little movement in here. It's not as sturdy and as solid of a connection as it would be sitting on the frame. So okay to jack here, but I think I would put the jack stands underneath the frame. That's a better spot for the jack stands. You could put them under here. One on either side is certainly going to hold the vehicle okay, but just keep in mind that you've got some spring movement in here at the rear end because this is a solid rear axle. I'm all the way here at the back of the vehicle, and you can see that this frame rail extends all the way back to here. So this is almost a full frame vehicle, front to back. There's lots of places to put your jacks or your jack stands, although I wouldn't put them all the way back here. I like to see them more towards the middle of the car, in front of the rear wheels and just behind the front wheels. We're underneath a different vehicle here. This is a GMC SUV of some sort, maybe an Envoy or something, but this particular vehicle has a unibody construction, but it also has this frame rail in it. It's not a full frame like we saw in the last vehicle, but it has this boxing component. So any of this stuff you see here that's boxed out like this is usually very sturdy and very strong. You can see right here we've got our lift set up underneath this little boxed area. This is a good spot to lift the car. There are going to be some other vehicles that have unibody construction that don't have this on here. They're just a floorboard, and that's not an acceptable place to lift on. And you'll be looking for this pinch weld here. So you can see all these little spot welds along this seam. These are very sturdy, and this is generally where you would lift a car that has unibody construction and does not have that boxed out feature. So underneath here would be great. You can even see there's a little cutout here for you to try to put a jack stand underneath it like this. And we can do that front and back. Again, I like to go behind the front wheels and in front of the rear wheels. I wanted to show you the front end of this GMC. It does have a full subframe in here. I mean, a completely boxed out steel subframe component that bolts into the unibody. Anywhere along here is a good place to place your jack or your jack stands. All of this is very solid all the way across. Okay, so and if you wanted to jack up the front and the middle, this is a great spot to do that. Very sturdy. And then even after you've jacked it up here, you can place your jack stands back under the middle of the car like we just talked about where that pinch weld is. If you guys are doing this type of work, I'm going to assume that you have a good floor jack like this. You might want to have one that's got an extended reach on it. For a job like this, it'll work wonders. Give us that extra room, the extra reach we need under the car without doing any damage to these plastic bumpers on here. So you don't ever want your jack lifting up on a bumper somewhere where it's plastic or somewhere where you can damage something. So be extra careful with that. All right, it's always good practice when you're jacking a car up that you use wheel chocks and you set the parking brake, make sure the vehicle's in park, all those things. We don't want the vehicle rolling. For these purposes, I assume that you're working in your garage or in your driveway. You should be on a flat, level ground. It's not a good idea to be jacking up on uneven surface on a hill. In hot asphalt, your jack stands have a tendency to sink right into the asphalt. Gravel, same type of thing. Wet ground. Be careful of your surroundings wherever you're planning on lifting your car. But if you're planning on working on your car, I'm assuming that you're going to be in some stable area. That's always a great idea. And use some wheel chocks if you have them. We're going to come in right from the front of the vehicle, right up to center, and we're going to try to engage this jack on that plastic tab that sits on the front subframe. Okay, once you're there, you're stable, go ahead and start lifting. Now that we've got the vehicle off the lift, I wanted to give you a good close-up of what this lifting block looks like. So this is where we had our lift sitting on here. You could jack from here. It's just hard to get a jack stand underneath here with your jack in place. So that's why we're jacking from the front. And we'll put our jack stand underneath each side. So we're all the way down right now with our jack. You can bring it up till it gets close. You just want to make sure you're even left to right. You want to make sure you're sitting in the middle of the saddle on here. This little cutout you see in here is designed to be removed. We don't need to take it out on this one, but it's there, nice indicator to let you know where that lifting pad is, right under the center here. We just want to make sure we put our jack stand in the middle of the saddle, in the middle of this lifting tab. I like to make sure that my jack stand's all the way down before I start, and then see how many clicks I go up to get close. So that was just one click on my jack stand, gets me about as close as I can get. I want to try to replicate that on the other side so the car goes up evenly. Just going to repeat this process on the other side. I've lifted my lever to make sure my jack stand is all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to find that little lift tab, make sure it sits in the center of the saddle. Bring it up one click. This way I match the other side. And then we're ready to let the front end down onto the jack stands. As we lower this car down, I want to loosen this handle very slowly. That's going to let the pressure, the hydraulic pressure out of the jack. That's going to allow the jack to drop down, and hopefully this car will sit right on those two jack stands like we planned. We're nice and slow. We don't want to go quickly. Take it nice and easy. Okay, and once you're off, you can remove your jack. Now that we've got the front end set all the way down on the jack stand, it's not a bad idea just to give it a little shake. Just make sure everything feels sturdy, nothing's going to move. If you're planning on working on your car while it's up on these jack stands, you want to be 100% certain that it's sturdy, safe, solid. Nothing's going to fall off, nothing's going to shake off, and nothing's going to move on you. If you guys are looking to get all four wheels up off the ground, I know I made a video about a Toyota Camry transmission service, which requires the vehicle to be level. And if you're up under there working, you want to make sure you got all four wheels up and the car is level front to back. If that's what you're trying to achieve here when you're working on your car, then you're definitely going to want to get the rear end up also. I'm going to demonstrate how to lift up on that rear differential and show you what that looks like. And then you would just place the jack stands into the rear blocks just in front of the rear wheels, exactly looking like the front ones, and make sure all four jack stands are at the equal height. I'm going to roll this jack under the car till I get underneath that rear differential. We'll tighten up our handle, give a few pumps and get it in close and see if we can get centered on the rear differential, and then you can just go ahead and lift it up. Now, one thing you'll notice, these jack wheels
They need to roll because as we lift this car up, this jack might creep forward towards the front of the car a little bit. We want it to do that because we don't want it to fall off the jack. So make sure your work area is smooth and clear, no rocks that are going to jam the wheels up on your floor jack. And this way this jack can move a little bit as the car lifts up. And you'll want to get this high enough where you can set your rear stands to the same height that you put your front ones. These rear lifting locations look exactly like the front. Nothing different there. You'd put your 2 jack stands underneath here. Make sure you have them set to the same height. And then let the car down slowly onto the rear, and you got all 4 wheels up off the ground. Come time to let the car back down off the jack stands, you're just going to reverse everything we did. So if you finished in the rear, let's take the rear out first. Come back to the front over here. Get your jack placed back under that center block. Make sure you're positioned properly and sturdy. Once you've engaged that frame, go ahead and jack it up until you're off the front jack stands. Same process. Once you've got it clear off your jack stands about an inch or so, you can come in here. I would pull this lever first. That's going to drop the centerpiece all the way down. And then you can remove your jack stands. And just remember, guys, this is adjustable. The higher up you go, the less stable it is. It gets a little wobbly, so if you don't need that height, I wouldn't use it. It's still going to be sturdy. It's not going to fall off or anything. Just make sure you're positively engaged on the teeth and your lever's all the way down, okay? And then make sure your fingers aren't underneath it. This thing drops pretty rapidly and it's fairly heavy. The last step is just let the front end down the rest of the way. Make sure your jack stands are well clear of the car. You don't want them to scrape the side of the car by accident as the car is coming down. And make sure this handle is not up anywhere near the front of the car as it comes down. You want to kind of pull this thing out more in a horizontal level and then slowly twist that handle and let this car back down to the ground. We don't ever want to be slamming anything quickly. This is not the speed shop. We're not in the middle of a pit stop here at a race. So just let that down nice and gentle. And we're safely back on the ground, all 4 wheels. This is going to sound silly, but don't forget to remove your wheel chocks from here. It's going to be tough to drive away with these stuck underneath the wheel. It's a good time to mention that if you've done any brake work on there, make sure you pump your brake pedal up so you've got a firm, high, hard pedal before you try to drive away. I've seen a lot of guys do a brake job. They can press the pistons, get everything down. They've done a perfect job, and then they go to back the car out, and the pedal goes all the way to the floor. So if you're doing brakes, make sure you throw that in there too. Well, there you have it, guys. I hope I've given you enough information and enough different examples here so you know exactly where to place your jack stands, where to place your jack, how to lift safely. Make sure you're looking at your owner's manual. If you guys are finding this information helpful to you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel. We got plenty more content for you. As a matter of fact, got another video up here we're popping up. Go ahead and check that one out. We'll see you in the next one.